In the last vignette, we were speaking about the defect of the Corinthians that made St. Paul very anxious about their salvation. And this is the fact that they were emotional, that their minds did not know the whole truth, and they were not referring their doubts and their questions on apostolic tradition. Now, this defect is quite serious if it happens today. And the fact of the matter is, it is happening today. We have shown you how the mind usually goes contrary to the teachings of God, and how the emotions, being blind, always go against the teachings of God. And we have shown the latter in the example of St. Peter, who was quite emotional and enthusiastic with regards to his relationship with Christ, but committed fatal errors. And the reason why he committed these errors precisely is because he was emotional. The reason of man and his emotions will always go astray as long as it is not guided by divine revelation. A true Catholic, therefore, will tend to subject his reason and his emotions to divine revelation. But he has to make sure first that he has gotten divine revelation right. Because if his knowledge of divine revelation is defective, there is no way by which he can control his reason and emotions. If you will notice, therefore, most of the Christian sect who are now separated from us were started by Catholic priests and Catholic bishops who had a defective knowledge of divine revelation. And because their knowledge was defective, their emotions got the better half of themselves. They were deceived by their feelings. They were afterwards deceived by their minds. They gave in to pride and eventually lost to the church. And so for us, therefore, it is important that before we try to apply divine revelation on our reason and emotion, we have to find out that our knowledge is complete. Now, the moment we allow divine revelation to govern the mind becomes more intelligent. It begins to have the grace of knowledge and wisdom. And the same thing happens when divine revelation controls our emotions. The destructive emotions never come in. It is only the noble ones that continue to exist, and they exist in a very stable way without too much going up and too much going down. And so let us go back again to the previous examples we have given you in the past vignettes and see how the natural man react to the happenings of the day and how a person who is governed by divine revelation would react. One of the examples we gave was the attitude towards the second coming of Christ or the end of the world. The natural man behaves this way in that his reason sees that there are no signs of the second coming, that the world seems to be just going fine, and there are no signs it is ending, so his reason says, it's not going to happen soon. Maybe later, but not soon. And of course, his emotions would react accordingly. in that because the mind believes that the end is not soon, so the emotions react by enjoying his life, precisely because there is no end that is arriving. But the man governed by divine revelation still acts exactly like the natural man. He works, he goes about his earthly business, but the big difference is in his mind. Enlightened by divine revelation, he knows that the second coming could come today or tomorrow, but definitely he believes that it is soon. And because this divine revelation is constantly in his mind, he reacts mentally and emotionally accordingly. There will be not much difference between the man governed by divine revelation and the natural man. Externally, they would be going about their earthly business, earning money for their sustenance and so on. The difference is in the mind. That's why Christ says when he comes at the second coming, there will be two persons around the mill and two persons who are planting. One Christ will get, the other he will leave behind. He would get the other one and also leave the other behind, which shows that both of them are doing exactly the same thing. But the one that Christ took along with him are those whose minds were awaiting the arrival of Christ, his second coming, and he believes that it could be soon. Both of them, the natural man and the one guided by divine revelation, both of them would also make great plans, and they would begin new projects, and they will even begin many ideas and plans for the future, making provisions for the future. Except the person guided by divine revelation knows very well that all his plans can be cut short, and some of them cut short even before it begins. And so the man guided by divine revelation knows very well that whatever he is doing by the sudden coming of Christ will be cut short abruptly. And the word is abruptly because that is how God acts, always abruptly. When God created the world, it is said that he created the seed-bearing trees and the mountains and the animals abruptly and completely. They did not have to go a moderate growth and development, as if the trees came from some very small plant and the plant grew so big eventually. It's not like that. God created everything abruptly and completely. That is how he acts. And the same thing, when Christ was here on earth, he used to act abruptly. When he was feeding the thousands, he did not get wheat and grounded the wheat and baked it into bread and gave it to them. He got bread abruptly, not wheat, but bread, and fed the thousands. And so the same thing when he changed water into wine, he did not get grapes and step on them and ferment the juice. He produced wine. See how abruptly God behaves. And so for us to think that man gradually evolved from the monkeys is ridiculous. When God created man, he was man, a complete man, a rational man. That is God's way, abruptly. And the man guided by divine revelation knows that the end will also come abruptly. This is what makes a true Christian different from all people. It is difficult to understand him, to put your finger on him, because his behavior is so different from everybody. His reaction to all the things of the world are unexpected. He seems to be unnatural, but the precise word is more supernatural. People expect him to be self-conceited, but he is not, though he is so gifted. They expect him to feel resentment when they make fun of him precisely because he is unnatural. But then he understands this reaction that people have towards him. He ought to feel always an expert in speaking about evil because he knows evil very much, and yet he is not very easy in giving talks on things which are evil. And so he is encouraged many times to practice his private judgment, but he always waits until he knows what is found in divine revelation. This, therefore, is the Christian, the true follower of Christ. He lives by divine revelation. And because he is the subject of divine revelation, he knows very well that things could end abruptly. The last difference between the natural man and the man of divine revelation is this: that the natural man works and loves his work and refuses to part with his work, while the man of divine revelation works, but he never sets his heart on his work, but on God. God bless you.